Hi, hi, and welcome to the third video out of 8 of the series leading up to the launch of my online training, the Inner Critic to Inner Coach. And this is video number 3, where we're going to be talking today about something very important to everybody, which is happiness and how to create more happiness. And what kind of day did I get today? A beautiful sunshiny day, and I'm sitting in my garden. We all know that sunshine is terrific for the way that we feel, and of course happiness is such a broad subject, and is studied by some really interesting key people, some of whom I'm going to be referencing today. And we're just going to be talking about a very critical part of it, which is your self-talk, your internal dialogue, and what role that can play in the uncreation of happiness, or what we might call depression, and of course what you can begin to start doing straight away to turn that around for yourself. Now, just to be really clear, that when I'm talking about depression today, I'm not talking about persistent, severe, what might be termed as a clinical depression. I'm really talking about episodic, temporary, mild depression, and that's what we're really referencing today. So if that feels familiar to you and you kind of relate to that, then listen up. And if it doesn't matter. Even if you're somebody who just wants to create more happiness, you might not be depressed, but you want to create more of the good stuff in your life, then you're in the right place, because I'm going to be talking a lot about positive psychology today, and an expert called Martin Seligman. And Martin Seligman, if you don't know him, look him up. He is termed the father of positive psychology. Positive psychology was a movement, probably started about 15 to 18 years ago, and it decided to shift the focus of mainstream psychology, which was all about studying what went wrong and sick and people who were broken or depressed or sad, to then try and work out how to create more of the good stuff, the happiness. And of course, now that the focus has changed, it really has enabled us to learn a lot more about the creation of happiness. And so Martin Seligman, he, about 16 years ago, did a bunch of meta-analysis on the research that had already been done. So he studied the results of existing research. And there's a couple of things that really came out of that, which I've really taken on board since I learned them, and have woven those principles through the inner coach practice that I teach on the training. And so one of the things that's really important that he identified for us was, in the past, we used to think that negative self-talk, bad critical internal dialogue, was a symptom of depression. And what he discovered was it was not necessarily a symptom, although of course it could get worse the more depressed that somebody got. But it was in fact one of the causes of ending up in a depressive state. And that's really important, because what that talks to us about is a very simple equation, that if you talk to yourself like crap, if you criticize yourself and tell yourself you're a bad person, if you leap on your own mistakes and judge and criticize yourself about that, you are going to feel bad. You can't talk to yourself in that way. You can't talk to yourself badly and expect to feel good. That equation just doesn't exist. So what that means is it's kind of a really, it's a simple equation to understand. If you're going to do that to yourself, you're going to suffer some of those ill effects of a bad feeling, and it makes perfect sense in the way that the brain works that would be the case. Now, the solution that Seligman found, which is the other key thing I'd like to reference here, is not that you need to be the complete opposite of that. So if you think that the opposite of a critic or negative internal dialogue and creating depression is that you have to be blindly optimistic and happy at all times, then that is a myth, that is a mistake. What he found was that it was no more useful to a person to be blindly optimistic than it was to be very pessimistic. So neither of those in their extremities is useful, because if you are or if you think you have to be this kind of like life's rosy and everything's going to be fine all the time, it didn't prepare you for life events which were inevitable for all of us, adversity. And therefore, when those events happened, the people that were thinking along those lines just didn't have the resilience that they needed, because life was a box of fluffy bunnies according to them, and then all of a sudden when it wasn't, that was too hard to bear, and they didn't get through those hard times very well. So what he found, and what the term that he phrased, was realistic optimist, and you can read about this in his book, Learned Optimism, which I'd highly recommend. And also, if you do have 3 spare minutes, look up on YouTube Pessimism versus Optimism, Seligman, and you'll find a 3-minute video that really explains what we call the 3 Ps, which are the essential ingredients in understanding the difference between the way he has termed optimism and pessimism. So do take time to look that up, because it's very, very interesting and very quick, and it's a very, very helpful tool that he's talking about there. Now, why is this so important then when we're thinking about the inner critic to inner coach stuff? Well, another person that I want to talk about is Michael Yapko, and Michael Yapko is very famous in the therapy world. He's known for something called brief therapy, and he's very well known for doing 1 to 2 sessions with somebody who has experienced a persistent depression, and within those 1 or 2 sessions he's able to take the person out of that depression and achieve a permanent result for them. Now, how does he do that? Well, you can look him up. He's got lots of resources online. But in terms of the critical piece we're talking about with internal dialogue, here's the thing that he teaches people, which is it's not that happy people don't have negative self-talk. It's not that they look at themselves in the mirror every day and say, "Oh my God, you're so awesome," and giving themselves high fives for making a sandwich or tying their shoelaces. They don't go around this kind of happy, clappy, Pollyanna positive. It's not how that neuroscience works. The difference is between somebody who's experiencing a state that we call depression and someone who's experiencing a state that's more desirable, which we call happiness, is that they still have the internal critic, but they have learned not to listen to it and not to pay attention to it. And this is really important. So the key message is to have a useful inner coach practice where we're overcoming the critic and creating more happiness, is not that we have to have this happy clappy, Pollyanna positive, blind optimism, positive all the time, and to believe that is a mistake and it won't work for you. So I'm debunking that myth for you, and I go into considerably more detail in the training, because it's a key component in which I base the inner coach practice on, and one of the things that makes it so effective and useful. So I go into it in a lot more detail there and explain, if it's not Pollyanna positive, then what is it? But for now, what I'd like to suggest you try is, instead of listening to that negative critic and that self-talk, why don't you pretend that you had a volume control, as if you were listening to a really crappy radio station? And why don't you experiment with pretending you could turn that down and see what it's like to have some reprieve from being constantly tuned in to that critical dialogue. Just try it for a couple of days and let me know how that goes. And I will see you tomorrow for video number 4, where we're going to be talking about self-esteem and really how to overcome low self-esteem. And I'll look forward to it and see you there. Any feedback, let me know.